The story of Bloody Mary. She lived deep in the forest in a tiny cottage and sold herbal remedies for a living. Folks living in the town nearby called her Bloody Mary and said she was a witch. None dared cross the old crone for fear that their cows would go dry, their food stores rot away before winter, their children take sick of fever, or any number of terrible things that an angry witch could do to her neighbors. Then the little girls in the village began to disappear one by one. No one could find out where they had gone. Grief-stricken families searched the woods, the local buildings, and all the houses and barns, but there was no sign of the missing girls. A few brave souls even went to Bloody Mary's home in the woods to see if the witch had taken the girls, but she denied any knowledge of the disappearances. Still, it was noted that her haggard appearance had changed. She looked younger and more attractive. The neighbors were suspicious, but they could find no proof that the witch had taken their young ones. Then came the night when the daughter of the miller rose from her bed and walked outside, following an enchanted sound no one else could hear. The miller's wife had a toothache and was sitting up in the kitchen treating the tooth with an herbal remedy when her daughter left the house. She screamed for her husband and followed the girl out of the door. The miller came running in his nightshirt. Together they tried to restrain the girl, but she kept breaking away from them and heading out of town. The desperate cries of the miller and his wife woke the neighbors. They came to assist the frantic couple. Suddenly, a sharp-eyed farmer gave a shout and pointed towards a strange light at the edge of the woods. A few townsmen followed him into the field and saw Bloody Mary standing beside a large oak tree holding a magic wand that was pointed towards the miller's house. She was glowing with an unearthly light as she set her evil spell upon the miller's daughter. The townsmen grabbed their guns and their pitchforks and ran towards the witch. When she heard the commotion, Bloody Mary broke off her spell and fled back into the woods. The angry townsmen leapt upon her and carried her back into the fields, where they built a large bonfire and burned her at the stake. As she burned, Bloody Mary screamed a curse at the villagers. If anyone mentioned her name aloud before a mirror, she would send her spirit to revenge herself upon them for her terrible death. When she was dead, the villagers went to the house in the woods and found the unmarked graves of the little girls the evil witch had murdered. She had used their blood to make her younger. From that day to this, anyone foolish enough to chant Bloody Mary's name 3 times before a darkened mirror will summon the vengeful spirit of the witch. It is said that she will tear their bodies to pieces and rip their souls from their mutilated bodies. The souls of these unfortunate ones will burn in torment as Bloody Mary once was burned, and they will be trapped forever in the mirror.
Bloody Mary. Bloody Mary. Bloody Mary.
As you may know, the Conjuring universe has shifted the horror genre in a different direction, centering around Ed and Lorraine Warren, world-renowned demonologists, and their experiences with things that are not of this world. The movies themselves are based on true stories of families that have experienced such horrors, including that of the Perron family, Amityville Horror, and the Hodgkins family, all of which have experienced demonic possession. A particularly violent demonic presence that still exists today is locked in a box on display at the Warrens Occult Museum, and you may have heard of her. She's an antique Raggedy Ann doll that goes by the name of Annabelle. The story begins in 1970, when 28-year-old nurse Donna and her roommate Angie were gifted the doll by Donna's mother, who bought it from a secondhand thrift store. At first, things were perfectly normal, and then things started to take a turn. The event started off small, like the doll crossing her legs and arms, and Donna coming home to her sitting in a different position than when she previously left her. Then the events became a little more drastic. Soon after, Donna and Angie began to notice that she would be sitting in a completely different room than before, and sitting on the floor rather than the chair or the bed. They then started to find small pieces of parchment paper they didn't own, around the house, with written messages like, "Help me, help us." The girls originally thought that there was some intruder that was moving the doll and leaving the notes, but when she began to leak a red liquid resembling blood, they decided it was time to call someone for help. The first medium to sit down with the girls and the doll told Donna and Angie that their apartment complex used to be a field, and that a 7-year-old girl named Annabelle Higgins had died there many years prior. When the doll entered their apartment, Annabelle's spirit found herself attached to it. Feeling sorry for the little girl, they gave her permission to move into it so she wouldn't be alone. A male friend of theirs by the name of Lou was the first to experience aggression from Annabelle. He was the first to admit that he was not fond of the doll and warned Donna that it was evil. One night, he was in a deep sleep over the apartment when he woke up to find Annabelle standing at his feet. Paralyzed, he watched as she climbed up his body to his neck and began to strangle him until he blacked out. When he woke up, he was certain it was not a dream. On another occasion, Lou and Angie were looking at maps for a trip Lou was going to take when they heard rustling from Donna's room as she was gone. Lou opened the door to find Annabelle laying in a corner rather than the bed. As he suddenly felt a presence behind him, he turned around to find no one, and suddenly doubled over, clutching his chest. They discovered 7 deep, hot scratches buried across his chest, which rapidly healed within 2 days. It was then that the Warrens got involved in the case. Along with the second medium, the Warrens explained to the girls that the medium they previously saw had been manipulated into seeing Annabelle so that she could move into the doll as a facade. What Lorraine Warren felt as a seer herself was a very sinister presence that surrounded the doll and their home. She came to the conclusion that this was not a spirit, but a demonic entity. She informed the girls that demons and evil entities don't possess things, they possess people. It didn't want to get inside of the doll. It wanted to get inside of them. A priest of the church blessed the apartment, the girls, and the doll, tasking the Warrens to take the conduit away and confine it to a space where it could not harm anyone else. On the way home, they experienced various issues, such as traffic accidents, failed power steering, and the car completely stalling. After sprinkling holy water on the doll, Ed and Lorraine were finally able to travel safely. When they got home, they locked her in a glass case next to numerous different haunted artifacts in the room and blessed it. If you look at pictures of the original doll, there are several warning signs plastered on her case saying, "Positively to not touch," as well as a cross that does not move. Although do not be fooled. Many cases of individuals who taunt the doll at the occult museum or doubt the existence of the evil attached to it were reported to get into near-death experiences or brutal accidents when leaving the museum. It's been proven that even though she can't touch you, it doesn't mean she can't hurt you. Although the origin of the evil entity itself is unclear, one thing is for certain: evil exists, and something is attached to the doll. As Ed Warren once said, "If we believe in God so much, it's time we started believing in the devil. Sometimes it's better to keep the genie in the bottle."
I call this story The Disappearance of Ashley. Sometime during the night of August 16th, 1952, the small town of Ashley, Kansas, ceased to exist. In the 8 days leading up to the disappearance of the town and its 679 residents, bizarre and unexplained events were reported by dozens of residents in Ashley, Kansas, and law enforcement from the surrounding area. The unexplained events began August 8th, 1952, at 7 p.m. A resident by the name of Gabriel Johnson reported a strange sight in the sky above the town. Ashley was a small town and didn't have law enforcement, which, in 1952, wasn't that uncommon for a small farming community. The nearest police station was in the nearby town of Hayes. Mr. Johnson reported a small, black opening in the sky. Within the next 15 minutes, the Hayes police became overwhelmed with dozens of phone calls, all reporting the same phenomena. A decision was made to send a trooper to Ashley to investigate the matter the following morning. Shortly before 8 a.m. August 9th, Officer Alan Mace left Hayes for Ashley to investigate the reports from the night before. Officer Mace quickly radioed the Hayes police station. He reported that, despite following one road leading into Ashley, he had somehow ended up back in Hayes. Officer Mace swore the road never curved or bent in any direction. At 9:15 a.m., 7 more police cars were sent to investigate the situation, and all members of the team came to the same conclusion. The road that was supposed to go into Ashley instead led back to Hayes. Meanwhile, Phone calls continued to pour into the Hayes police station. The black opening in the sky continued to grow in size. All callers were advised to remain inside and not travel outside unless absolutely necessary. August 10th, 1952. 7:38 a.m., phone calls from Ashley to the Hayes police station reported that the town was in total darkness. The sun had never risen that morning. At 10:15 a.m., at the request of Hayes law enforcement, a helicopter from Topeka, Kansas flew over the region in which Ashley, Kansas stood. The helicopter reported that they never found the town. The next day, August 11th, 1952, Miss Phoebe Danielewski called into the Hayes police station, reporting that her young daughter Erica had gone missing sometime during the night. Miss Danielewski was afraid to search for her daughter in the darkness that enveloped the town. Over the course of the next 12 hours, calls began steadily pouring in describing similar situations with the children of the town. The following morning of August 12th, the situation became dire. During the middle of the night, all 217 children in the town of Ashley disappeared. A reported 421 phone calls were placed to the Hayes Police Department. Unable to be of any useful assistance, Hayes law enforcement instructed all callers to remain inside and avoid any and all attempts at finding the missing children. At 5:19 p.m., the evening of August 13th, Ashley resident Scott Luntz reported a growing, distant fire to the south. According to his description, the fire seemed to turn the distant black into bright and red-orange that extended high into the sky. Throughout the rest of the day, calls continued in, stating that the fire, in addition to moving north, now seemed to come out of the black sky. No fire was ever witnessed by any of the neighboring communities or law enforcement officials. Reports continued until 12:09 a.m. the morning of August 14th. The last phone call placed by a Mr. Benjamin Endicott, reporting that the fire in the sky had grown so intense that it appeared as daytime over the town. The phone call ended abruptly, and attempts to contact Mr. Endicott went unanswered. The last communication from the town of Ashley happened at 9:46 the following day, August 15th. Miss April Foster was the last resident of the town to be heard from. She called to report the fire was getting closer to the town and that, strangely, she could see figures moving through the fire even as it approached. The line went dead after 4 minutes. At 3:28 a.m., August 17th, 1952, a magnitude 7.9 earthquake was measured by the United States Geological Survey. The earthquake itself was felt throughout the state and most of the Midwest. The epicenter determined to be directly under Ashley, Kansas. Despite their unsuccessful previous attempts, law enforcement officials returned to Ashley. Only this time, they were unprepared for what they saw. The black cloud that hung over the town and the fire that had been reported had cleared, but when they arrived at what should have been the outskirts of the farming community, they found a smoldering, burning fissure in the earth, measuring 1,000 yards in length and 500 yards wide. The depth of the fissure was never determined. A statewide and local search for the missing 679 residents of Ashley, Kansas was called off by the Kansas state government August 29, 1952, 12 days later. All 679 residents were assumed to be dead. The next day, August 30th, another earthquake hit. When law enforcement investigated 5:32 a.m., shortly before sunup, they reported that the fissure where Ashley stood had been closed. Rumor has it that you can still sort of visit the site if you're up around the Hayes area, but don't expect to find a crater or loose earth. After the unspeakable tragedy and never being able to locate any of the survivors, state and area officials decided the best thing to do was strip the historical records of mentions of the town. The place where Ashley, Kansas once stood was developed and eventually flooded to symbolically wash away the memories of the place and maybe quell the fire that still raged underground. Think about the next time you're in the area and go to the Cedar Bluff Reservoir. If you look too deep into the lake, you may see the lost spirits of the townfolk staring back.